Thank you to all four of those extraordinary leaders. At the AMO conference, you get to hear from leaders of all political stripes. Andrea Horwath made history more than a decade ago when she became the first woman chosen to lead Ontario's New Democrats. Her political career started off in municipal government as a Hamilton City Councillor. She served Hamilton Centre as its NDP MPP since 2004. Please welcome the Leader of Ontario's official opposition, Andrea Horvath.
Hello, friends. Bonjour, chers amis. Mayors, reeves, wardens, councillors, friends. It's so great to be back at AMO. Of course, we're all missing the opportunity to catch up face-to-face, but like all of you, I am so thankful for the organizers, volunteers, staff, and sponsors of this year's conference who worked hard to make this innovative virtual conference a success. Because now more than ever, Ontario needs AMO. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to threaten the lives and livelihoods of so many Ontarians, we need your passion, your expertise, and AMO's powerful voice for our communities if we're going to successfully weather the rest of this storm, recover, and rebuild. You've already been leaders during this crisis, working tirelessly to ensure that both the province and the federal government step up and provide municipalities with the financial support that they need to stay afloat during the pandemic. Thanks to your work, communities across the province will be able to count on $1.7 billion from the federal government and $2.2 billion from the province, a positive first step in helping to staunch the bleeding in municipalities' books. Leaving local governments to deal with enormous COVID-19 related budget shortfalls simply was not an option. So these investments have bought us some valuable extra time. But there's still much more work to do in order to get municipalities out of the hole and back on track. This work has to start with a clear plan from the Ford government about how the remaining $5 billion in federal support will be allocated. In the months ahead, municipalities will need to make investments in infrastructure, services, and job creation to revive local economies and support folks in their communities. Ce n'est jamais un travail facile. To do that critical work, you will need to know how much funding to expect, when to expect it, and how it will be flowed. And that's how we build stability for municipalities in these difficult times, in the short term, by making sure there is a clear plan, ensuring the government shares that plan for all to see, so that everyone, municipal leaders, public employees, and everyday Ontarians knows what to expect. Re-announcements about future spending won't put shovels in the ground. They won't address painful budget pressures and layoffs or create the new jobs that are so sorely needed. They won't keep municipal services running like childcare, transit, water treatment, or help families in your communities keep food on the table. So alongside you, I'm going to be pushing for firm commitments, transparency, and how flowing dollars is important now. Another critical part of our COVID recovery must be a plan to save main streets across Ontario. For the duration of this pandemic, I've been working with businesses of all sizes, pushing Mr. Ford to stop sitting on his hands and waiting for Mr. Trudeau to save local businesses. Now, months later, it's crystal clear that the convoluted rent support plan that they cooked up in Ottawa just does not help most small and medium-sized enterprises. And that's why the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and other advocacy groups have gotten behind our Save Main Street plan. We called for a 75% commercial rent subsidy, right to the commercial tenant, a utility payment freeze, and a grace period on auto insurance for taxis and car-sharing drivers. We've also suggested two funds to support SMEs. The first would cover remote work setup and safe reopening costs, while the second would be an emergency fund focused on small businesses and entrepreneurs from communities that have faced long-standing historic barriers to accessing traditional capital. Like municipalities, our local businesses know what they need to rebuild and thrive. We just need a government that will step up and get it done. You know, as we begin to turn our minds to what comes next, and when we can expect to turn the corner on COVID-19 and move towards a recovery, one that will work for communities all across our province, urban, rural, large, and small, It is critical that we avoid the trap of returning to normal. Because while COVID-19 has done enormous damage to our communities, our municipalities, and the economy of our province, the status quo before the pandemic wasn't good enough. Municipalities have been asked year after year to maintain services, while Liberal and Conservative governments forced them to be stretched further and further by new downloaded responsibilities and cuts. For years, the previous Liberal government promised to help municipalities address these issues with an increased share of gas tax revenue and the stable, predictable funding for local services that would have come with it. But for 6 years, they dragged their feet as municipalities struggled with the increasing costs of delivering core services like affordable housing and public health. Then when Mr. Ford came to power, instead of offering municipalities the stable, predictable, long-term funding deals that you need, he decided to slash the gas tax and funding for municipal programs even further. That's why Moody's said last June that the Ford government's cuts to public health agencies, ambulances, gas tax transfers, paramedic services, and childcare programs would leave municipalities more than $2 billion worse off over the next decade. For decades before COVID-19, the status quo in Ontario has made life harder for municipal leaders and staff, leaving you to scramble and try to work miracles to prevent that pain from landing on the doorsteps of your residents. So, as we rebuild, let's work towards a new normal and a better future. A future where Queen's Park respects municipalities as partners and as the level of government closest to the people. A future where you're empowered to do what you do best, where the province supports local governments with stable and predictable sources of funding, instead of only showing up when a crisis or an election looms. That means raising the OMPF to at least $550 million, and raising it regularly after that to keep up with inflation and community needs. It means increasing the Community Infrastructure Fund, making it more transparent, and allotting a greater share of existing municipal gas tax funding, so communities can build the infrastructure they need to grow and thrive. It also means making it a priority to amplify the voices of leaders from communities across Ontario, including northern and rural municipalities. Because every community in our province deserves development policies that work for them, and one size does not fit all. These stable and predictable sources of funding are essential to the health of municipalities and our province. And if we work together, I know that they can be the foundation of a recovery where municipalities don't just survive the pandemic, but also get the supports and tools they need to look forward and emerge from COVID-19 stronger than before. On a besoin d'un changement pour le mieux. So let's tackle the big things we need to jumpstart local economies and move our province forward. Let's ensure the province puts up its fair share of 50% of transit operating costs and give Ontarians access to more efficient, affordable transit. Let's act on what we've learned from the economic impacts of the coronavirus and level the playing field for rural communities, businesses, and schools by finally expanding broadband internet access throughout the province. Let's stop pinching pennies on the backs of our kids and invest in education at all levels, starting with taking immediate action to properly renovate and update our kids' schools and make sure that every student returns to school full-time in the fall in smaller, safer classes. You know, everyone here shares the same vision for a future with healthy, vibrant, and resilient communities, an economy that is bounced back better and fairer than before, and world-class services that we can all depend on, both in times of crisis and times of prosperity. Together, I know we can build that future and make Ontario the best place in the world to live, work, and thrive. Pour un Ontario meilleur, agissons ensemble. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech.
Thank you, Minister Horwath. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll hear from the leader of the Ontario Liberals. But first, a short message on behalf of AMO partner, the Frank Cohen Company. Here's its president and principal broker, Larry Ryan.
Well, thank you, and welcome everybody to the Frank Cohen presentation. I'd like to start with a brief introduction about Frank Cowan Company and myself. The Frank Cowan Company has been providing municipal insurance for well over 90 years, all across Canada. And a little bit about myself. My name is Larry Ryan. I'm the president of Frank Cowan Company. I've been the president for about 9 years. And previous to that, I was in the municipal sector. I spent 26 years in the municipal sector, all in municipal finance. In the last 15 years, I was a CFO/treasurer for a regional municipality in Ontario. And next, these are the topics I'm going to quickly talk about today, so I'm not going to really get in too much depth about these individual topics. I'll talk about the insurance environment today, joint and several liability. It's been a hot topic over the last little while, focusing on the critical success factors, and then really think about municipalities, what you can control and what you can do with your insurance costs. So, starting with the municipal insurance environment, the municipal marketplace is basically characterized by either a soft market or a hard market. Currently, we're in a hard market. We were previously in a soft market for well over a decade. Soft market typically means lower prices, higher competition. Hard market is kind of the opposite. And this is just not a municipal environment, insurance environment phenomenon. This is an international phenomenon all over North America, all over Europe, and as well in all lines, personal lines, commercial lines. So this is industry-wide. So what does a hard market mean? A hard market means you'll see rate increases, you'll see insurers leaving the marketplace or less bids on specific RFPs, if you will. Property capacity is a bit of a challenge. Can you fill up your book from a property policy coverage perspective? It's more challenging now. Lower limits sometimes. Municipalities have upwards of $50 million limits. Sometimes that may be more difficult to get those higher limits, and quite frankly, higher deductibles. So those are all the things that can happen in a hard market to a municipality and across all business segments. Started in 29, the hard market. It will continue into 21, so it will be around for a while. Similarly, there are constant drivers of municipal cost of claims. They're going up. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, joint and several liability, but it's just one of the factors. Another significant factor, climate change, more higher frequency of significant storms. So higher frequency of severe storms, larger property claims. Class actions, higher frequency of those, easier to certify those class actions, and they're costly to defend. Increased severity. So what was a $5 million claim 15 years ago is now a $10 million claim 10 years ago, and now we're seeing that to be $15 and $20 million. Another factor, lack of contributory negligence. So the individual committing, making the claim, the plaintiff, typically less percentage of liability is now being attributed to that individual, more to the municipality. Higher frequency of transit claims. You all have heard about cyber claims are on the rise. Everybody knows about a municipality in Ontario, or more than one, has had a cyber claim. And now, unfortunately, we're within COVID-19, a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace. Clearly, there are going to be some claims there. What will those costs of claims be? It's uncertain at this point in time. So those will all contribute to higher cost of claims, and then the impact of that, higher premiums. So the environment now, hard market, and those drivers for municipal cost of claims going up. So I want to speak a little bit about joint and several liability. Been talked about for a long, long time, and one simple point I'd like to make, it's not a magic bullet for municipalities. As you saw in the previous slide, joint and several liability is one of the factors, but there's 5 or 7 others that are contributing to the cost of increasing claims for municipalities as well. We've been trying to change this for decades. When I was in the municipal sector myself, I was lobbying when I was on the municipal side in finance department for change. So how is this going to how are we going to invoke change? What are those critical success factors that are going to have joint and several liability actually change? Well, these are fairly significant hurdles. joint and several liability is a principle of law. It's very difficult to change because of the nature of it. It's a principle of law. And the law community is divided. Plaintiff lawyers are against changing it. Some defense lawyers are in favor of it. So there's going to be a real challenge getting consensus on the municipal, on the lawyer side, on the legal, throughout the legal profession. Another thing is we need a provincial champion for this to be successful. 5 or 6 years ago when Frank Cowan was involved and I was personally involved, John Gerritsen was the Attorney General and he was a champion for this. He was a former mayor of a large municipality in Ontario and understood the impacts of what joint and several can be on municipalities. We don't have that provincial champion now, I believe. So it's going to be very hard to change. And then one fundamental question is, if insurers and municipalities are not paying, so the problem with joint and several liability is municipalities and insurers paid more than their fair share, and if that's going to stop, who will pay? I think the courts will require somebody to pay because of that. So we have to answer that question, and that's the answer to that question is not clear. So really difficult thing to change. It's been going on for decades. Some really big challenges and critical success factors that we need to overcome before changes is actually going to happen. And then my last topic is municipalities. What can you do? Municipalities can't change the insurance environment in terms of a hard market. Very difficult to change joint and several liability. But what you can do is focus on the things you can control. Improve your risk management efforts. If you minimize your and reduce your exposures, you will reduce claims. You will have a positive impact on your premiums. So focus on the things that you can control. You can control your exposures. You can reduce your claims. You should see a positive impact on your premiums. And then simply put, I've talked about a lot of complicated things earlier, but still motor vehicle accidents and trip and slip and falls remain the biggest drivers of municipal claims. 70% of the cost of claims in Ontario is surrounding those two areas, motor vehicle accidents and trip and falls. So what can you do? Maintain your infrastructure. Adhere to the minimum maintenance standards. Those are regulated by the province. You have to do that. If you adhere to those, you will have a defense when you have those motor vehicle accident claims coming in your door. And what you really need to do is ask your insurer for help. Your insurer should be your partner. They should help you with some of these risk management services, fleet specialists, road specialists, individuals that can come into your municipality and provide you with unique services to help you reduce your exposures and eliminate claims. The other piece I want to address is deductibles. Deductibles are increasing, therefore the cost of the claims, a little bit higher proportion is borne by the municipality. A greater requirement for municipalities to actually manage their claims better. If you manage your claims better, reduce your cycle time, control your legal spend, closing ratios, close as many of those claims as you can. If you have a good management plan, you can save dollars. You can save dollars. It's a kind of a total cost of risk approach. You can save dollars by reducing your cost of claims below the deductible, reducing your claims. Therefore, if you reduce your cost of claims through some risk management efforts, you will see a positive impact on your premiums. So that's my quick update. Again, my name is Larry Ryan. Thank you for having me today. Appreciate it. Hope that everybody's going to enjoy the conference. And if you want to ask me a question, there's my email, larry.ryan@frankcowan.com. Send me an email. I'll respond. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Larry. This past March, our next guest, Stephen Del Duca, was chosen to lead and rebuild the Ontario Liberals. He was first elected in 2012 as an MPP in Vaughan. He later served in Kathleen Wynne's cabinet as Minister of Transportation and Minister of Economic Development and Growth. Please welcome Ontario Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Over the years, this gathering has been held in every corner of Ontario. But this is the first time that it's been held every place in Ontario. So no matter where you are in the province, and no matter which room of the House you're in, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for welcoming me into your home. I realize that in these strange COVID times, some politicians find it difficult to deliver talks online, It's hard because you don't get a reaction from people. For example, you don't hear people laugh at your jokes. You never hear any applause. But this lack of response isn't too tough for me because, you see, I have 2 daughters at home, one of whom is going to be a teenager in just a few months. So actually, I'm used to it. Over the past few months, things have been a little less quiet than normal at our house. And most of the work that I've done since becoming leader of the Ontario Liberal Party on March 7th has actually been conducted from my dining room. 4 walls and a table, just like so many of you. It's still amazing to me how fast we went from rooms full of people to being alone in a room. From zooming around the province, the country, even the world, to Zoom calls. But there's another strange thing that's happened during COVID, and it's a bit of a paradox. While all of us were dealing with local challenges that were important to us, the news has been dominated by provincial, national, and even international stories. For most of us, what was most concerning, the world literally right outside our front door, was spoken about the least. And yet at the same time, the order of government that was being asked to do the most was local. As the leaders of your towns and cities, you had to deal with local outbreaks in long-term care, and no one rode to your rescue. Your local public health units were the first line of defense, and they were all too often out there on their own. And you had to have answers for your neighbors, those that you proudly represent, who were afraid about their health and that of their family, and afraid about their economic future. Once again, as too often is the case, Ontario's municipalities were asked to do more, much more, with less. So I want to say, on behalf of the Ontario Liberal Party, to all of you who stepped up and performed heroically throughout the pandemic, on the front lines of communities large and small, and every corner of our incredible province, thank you. Thank you for your leadership, thank you for your thoughtfulness, and thank you for doing all that you've done to help Ontario flatten the curve. If COVID has taught us anything, and I really hope it has, it's that we can do so much more when we work together. I think by now we must appreciate that one country, one province, or one municipality, all on its own, can't possibly solve the scale of the problems that we face. The only way to defeat major challenges like a pandemic, or like climate change, or like a global recession, is to work together. And bound together, we're strong and resilient. And together, Ontario's 444 municipalities can be a powerful voice for lasting change. So I would argue, now is the time for municipal voices to continue to be heard, loudly and clearly. Because I suspect that the daily press conferences from Queen's Park and Ottawa will soon be winding down, and the media lens and the public's attention will likely swing back to local and regional issues, which means that we can make the case to build Ontario back up again, town by town, region by region, community by community, and build back stronger than we were, ready to face whatever the future throws at us. That's what I want to talk about with you today, about what needs to be done to rebuild our communities as we come out of the pandemic, and about the importance of public education and the reopening of our schools. But before I do that, I want to make something very clear. For way too long, too many political parties, including my own, and too many leaders, including many who I admire, have looked at our province as a collection of winnable or unwinnable ridings, instead of places where our friends and neighbors live, as red or blue colors on a map, instead of living, breathing communities. That's got to stop. We only have to look south of the border to see the toxic and deadly results of hyper-partisan politics. That's why my plan to build up the Ontario Liberal Party starts in your communities, all of them. It starts with finding local leaders, women and men, people who are already building communities through their work, their volunteerism, and their talent. We're going to find smart, committed people of every age, every background, and every orientation that our amazing province already includes, and include them in our party, presenting them as candidates in the next election. And this grassroots, community-centered approach is not only how we will build up my party, it's how we're going to build up our province, too. I believe that this approach has been missing, in particular over the past 2 years. Your ability to build grassroots, community-based positive change has been weakened. Prior to the pandemic, you faced unnecessary disruption from Queen's Park rather than having a stable and predictable partnership. Now, I think that puts all of us at risk because it's short-sighted. Because if municipalities can't pay, can't become more autonomous, can't support people the way that you all want and need to, many of the programs the federal and provincial governments have begun will be ineffective. If you can't afford to pay municipal workers, the people who cared for our communities and put themselves at risk, our firefighters, public transit workers, and so many more, well, then our social services are at risk, as well as our safety and our health. So how do we stop the crisis before it comes? Well, I think we have to build from the ground up by investing in critical infrastructure and making decisions that lay the foundation for sustained success. About a generation ago, the provincial government of the day chose to download thousands of kilometers of roads, highways, and bridges. For them, it was convenient and it helped deal with Queen's Park's fiscal pressures. But they stuck your local residents with the bill. And I know that it's been a long-standing struggle to maintain this infrastructure, which was never meant to be funded by local property taxes. We want to work with you to review whether or not these physical assets, which are important for our safety and our economy, should be uploaded. In addition, more than 100 municipalities across the province rely on annual funds to support local public transit through the provincial gas tax program. In 2019, the current government cut the increase to this funding, a move that set back our efforts to encourage more people to leave their cars at home and set back our plan to fight climate change. You need those funds. You deserve those funds. We'd restore those funds. In a world where we now realize global supply chains are vulnerable and everyone is thinking local, we'd support Ontario's critically important agri-food sector and build 2 new Ontario food terminals, one in the east and the other in the southwest. We'd also help spur local economic development by decentralizing government and do our best to locate agencies and ministry functions in communities where the cost of housing is low and the quality of life is high. Of course, that's not possible without broadband, which is as essential in 2020 as electricity and running water, something that the pandemic has made abundantly clear. So I want to make sure Ontario can deliver and does deliver high-speed, affordable, reliable internet to all Ontarians, and I'm determined to make this an urgent priority for my new government. Delivering on broadband is important for social connectivity and quality of life, but it's also essential for our prosperity, especially as we provide more direct support to those sectors of the economy that need it most. All over our province, we've witnessed how small businesses have been battered so badly during the pandemic. While many big box stores remained open, thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs whose businesses populate our province's main streets were shuttered, and now far too many are in dire shape. We cannot afford to sit back and simply hope that this problem will fix itself, especially considering that nearly 90% of Ontario's workers are employed by small or medium-sized businesses. So I've called on the government to take concrete steps that would provide immediate relief and support to our small businesses and help make sure that our main streets remain healthy and vibrant. 1, deliver a 3-month holiday to the provincial portion of the sales tax. 2, waive the payroll premiums like payments for WSIB and the employer health tax that were deferred for 6 months back in March. And 3, help small businesses procure the PPE that's needed to make sure that their workers and customers are safe. Now, with the rest of the time that I have at this podium today, I want to focus my remarks on an issue that is absolutely vital for Ontario's future: the stability of public education and the need that we all have to have a safe reopening of our schools. Earlier in my remarks, I told you about the daughters that my wife and I are raising. I consider being a dad to be the single most important job that I will ever have, and I would do anything to make sure that my daughters have every single opportunity to succeed and lead good lives. I also believe that it's every generation's fundamental responsibility to ensure that the next generation is positioned for success, prosperity, and happiness. From my perspective, the single best way to ensure that my daughters and the millions of other young people like them across Ontario succeed is by properly supporting and funding public education. In fact, when you serve as a Premier of Ontario, I believe your two most important responsibilities are public education and public health care. As you may recall, for most of the last 12 months, our public education system was in a state of disarray, featuring the kind of labor unrest that disrupted the school year, frayed parents' nerves, and did nothing to help our kids thrive. And then the pandemic struck, requiring 2 million students and over 100,000 teachers to rapidly shift to online learning, which was very tough on everyone involved. In exactly 3 weeks from today, Ontario's public schools will reopen. My daughters will be starting grade 8 and grade 4. And I'm deeply concerned that the current government's plan for the reopening fails to make the grade. Several weeks ago, I released the Ontario Liberal plan for the start of the school year. It was detailed and fully costed, and it featured an ironclad commitment to cap class sizes at 15 so that our students could be physically distant and therefore safe while learning. It called for partnering with all of you and all of our municipalities to add thousands of new unconventional classroom spaces in community centers, arenas, public libraries, and even outdoors, again, to help us keep class sizes small. And it included the hiring of enough certified teachers and custodians to make sure all classrooms were properly supervised and cleaned. A few days after our plan was released, Doug Ford released his government's plan. No commitment to smaller class sizes. No ability to guarantee adequate physical distancing. Too few new teachers and custodians to make a meaningful, positive difference. And a decision to invest about 10% of what is actually needed to get this right, an amount that equals less than $1 a day per child in the public education system. In other words, after months of wasting time and squandering the opportunity to forge a real plan, Doug Ford chose to treat our kids, their families, and everyone who works in public education, teachers, principals, support staff, and custodians, like an afterthought. This is not good enough. Not for my daughters or anyone else in Ontario. And you don't have to take my word for it. Since the release of the government's plan, a clear consensus has emerged from both health experts and those on the front line in education that Doug Ford dropped the ball, especially as it relates to smaller class sizes. As a province, we've all worked so hard to flatten the curve, and all indications suggest that we are moving in the right direction. It is inconceivable to me that Doug Ford would want to roll the dice and take a chance with the start of the school year. But it's not too late. Doug Ford still has the chance to reconsider because, as the saying goes, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. So I urge all of you, as leaders in communities in every corner of Ontario, to push the government to take the time and make the investments necessary to get it right. And getting it right means that our public schools are open and safe, so that moms and dads can go back to work as our economy comes back to life with the peace of mind that they deserve. I want to thank you I want to thank you for giving me the chance to share my thoughts with you. I wish you all the very best for a successful, albeit unusual, AMO conference. And I look forward to being back with all of you in person next year. In the meantime, please stay safe and healthy. Thanks very much.
Thank you to the leader of the Ontario Liberals. We now have a 30-minute break for delegates to visit with exhibitors or join the women's networking session in the CIBC lounge. I do want to highlight that there is fierce competition in the exhibit hall. Delegates can earn points by interacting with exhibitors. It's also an opportunity to learn about the products and services that benefit municipalities. Plus, there are prizes to be won, including a free AMO 2021 conference registration and Air Canada tickets anywhere across Canada. We'll see you back here in half an hour.